David dear, I'm so glad you could make it, my Aunt Helena said with that fake smile I had known since I was a child, greeting me at the door of the lawyer's office. She didn't even wait for my answer before turning and whispering something to my cousin Roberto, who discreetly waved to the other family members scattered around the elegant waiting room. I was there for the reading of my grandmother Marina's will. She had passed away 2 weeks earlier. She was a woman who had built a restaurant empire from scratch and always treated me as if I were special, even when the rest of the family saw me as the problem grandson who chose to be a teacher instead of a manager. My name is David, I am 32 years old, and throughout my adult life I have heard jokes about how I wasted my potential by choosing to educate children instead of managing businesses. Especially from this same family that now pretended to deeply mourn the loss of their matriarch. The lawyer, a serious man with gold-rimmed glasses, called us into the main room. There were 15 of us in all, uncles, cousins, spouses, all dressed in black and wearing appropriately solemn expressions. Let's begin, he announced, opening a leather folder. Marina Santos's will is quite specific in its provisions. He began by reading the smaller items. To Helena, the summer house in Cabo Frio. To Roberto, the art collection. To cousin Fernanda, the family jewels. Each name was called, each gift was received with a respectful nod. My name was not mentioned. I watched the reactions around me. Some avoided my gaze. Others seemed slightly uncomfortable. Helena kept that fixed smile I knew so well. And that concludes the reading of the will, said the lawyer, closing the folder. Total silence in the room. 15 pairs of eyes carefully avoided me. Excuse me, I said, my voice breaking the tense silence. Was there a mistake? My grandmother didn't leave me anything. Helena quickly stepped forward. David dear, you know how practical your grandmother was. She knew you were well established with your job at the school, that you didn't need. Didn't need what? I interrupted. The lawyer looked uncomfortable, glancing at Helena, then at me. Mr. David, What he's trying to say, Roberto interjected, is that Grandma wanted you to focus on your teaching career. She always said that money could distract you from your noble calling. Noble calling. As if being a teacher was some kind of volunteer work I did as a hobby. But as they spoke, something didn't add up. I remembered the last conversation I had with my grandmother, 3 days before she died. She held my hand with surprising strength and said, David, you've always been different from the others. That's why you're my favorite. And favorites deserve special gifts. I looked at the lawyer, who seemed increasingly uncomfortable. Can I see the original will? That's not necessary, Helena said quickly. David, please don't make this any harder than it already is. But I saw something in the lawyer's eyes. A flash of guilt? Embarrassment? Actually, he said slowly, perhaps it would be better if we spoke privately, Mr. David. The room exploded into nervous murmurs. That's not necessary, Helena repeated, her voice now louder. The will has been read. Everything is clear. But I was already getting up, following the lawyer into his private office. Because for the first time in years, someone in the family seemed genuinely nervous. And when the family got nervous, it usually meant they were hiding something big. If you're following this family betrayal story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel because what I discovered in that private room completely changed my life. And there's two. What Helena and the others didn't know was that I had spent the last few years carefully documenting every conversation, every promise, every strange moment involving my grandmother and her fortune. Because teachers, by nature, pay attention to details that others ignore. The lawyer's private office had that smell of waxed wood and old papers that you find in traditional firms. He closed the door behind us and gestured for me to sit in the leather armchair in front of his desk. Mr. David, he began, removing his gold-rimmed glasses and cleaning them nervously. My name is Dr. Enrique Mendez, and I was your grandmother's personal lawyer for 23 years. He opened a locked drawer and took out a second folder, much thicker than the first. What was read outside, he said, tapping the original folder lightly, was an edited version of the actual will. My stomach knotted. Edited how? Dr. Mendez sighed deeply. Your grandmother left very specific instructions. She wanted me to read the official version to the entire family first. Then I would talk to you privately about her actual provisions. He opened the thicker folder. David, your grandmother left you $30 million, plus the main property in Petropolis, including the administrative headquarters of the restaurant chain. The world stopped for a second. $30 million. But why the secrecy? I asked, my voice coming out hoarser than usual. Because, Dr. Mendez said, leafing through some documents, she discovered that your family was planning to contest any significant inheritance left to you. Helena and Roberto hired their own lawyers 6 months ago, preparing arguments about your financial instability and lack of business experience. He showed me a series of printed emails. Conversations between Helena and a law firm, discussing strategies to overturn testamentary dispositions in favor of irresponsible family members. Your grandmother intercepted these communications through her accountant, who is Roberto's cousin. Apparently, Roberto was careless enough to discuss the plans during a family dinner at the accountant's house. I felt a mixture of anger and sadness. Anger at the obvious betrayal, sadness that my grandmother had spent her last months knowing that her own family planned to steal my inheritance. She then devised this plan, Dr. Mendez continued. She created 2 versions of the will. The first, which we just read, distributes only the minor assets among the family members. The second, which is the legally valid version, transfers the main assets to you. He handed me a sealed letter with my name written in my grandmother's unmistakable handwriting. She asked me to give this to you personally. I opened the letter with slightly trembling hands. My dear David, if you are reading this, then my plan has worked perfectly. I discovered a few months ago that Helena and Roberto were conspiring to contest any inheritance I left to you. They think you are weak, naive, unfit to run a business. How wrong they are. You were the only one who ever visited me out of love, not out of interest. The only one who asked about my health, not my investments. The only one who brought your students to meet Grandma Marina, because you thought my stories would inspire them. That's why I left almost everything to you. Not just the money, but total control of Marina Santos restaurants. It's your responsibility now. Helena has managed our Sao Paulo branch for the last 10 years. She doesn't know that I discovered the accounting irregularities. Roberto coordinates our marketing department, but he doesn't know that I found evidence that he embezzled funds from last year's advertising campaign to pay his personal gambling debts. They thought they could manipulate me because I'm sick. They thought they could manipulate you because you're just a teacher. Prove them wrong, my grandson. Not for revenge, but for justice. With all my love and trust, Grandma Marina. I looked up from the letter and found Dr. Mendez watching me with an almost paternal expression. There's more, he said softly. Your grandmother hired a forensic accounting firm to investigate the operations managed by Helena and Roberto. The reports are in this folder. He pushed a third folder toward me. In short, Helena embezzled approximately 200,000 reis over the last 3 years through ghost suppliers. Roberto used the company's promotional account to pay off personal debts of 400,000 reis. My mind was racing. All these years, while they treated me like the problem relative who chose a profession with no future, they were literally stealing from the woman they claimed to love. What now? I asked. Now, Dr. Mendez said, you need to decide how you want to proceed. Legally, you are entitled to everything your grandmother left you. You also have enough evidence to criminally prosecute Helena and Roberto for embezzlement. He paused. But your family doesn't know any of this yet. To them, you're still the grandson who came away empty-handed from the reading of the will. I looked out the office window. Outside, I could see Helena and Roberto talking animatedly in the parking lot, probably celebrating the success of their plan. They didn't know that in a few minutes I would walk out of that office as the new owner of a restaurant empire. They didn't know that I had evidence in my hands that could send them to prison. And for the first time in years, I had an advantage they would never expect. They would continue to underestimate me until the moment they discovered the truth. Dr. Mendez leaned forward. David, your grandmother left one last instruction. She said you would know when the time was right to reveal the truth. That you would understand the difference between hasty justice and true justice. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my inside jacket pocket. Dr. Mendez, I said, my voice now firm and determined, for now, no one else needs to know about this conversation. He nodded with a small smile. I thought you would say that. I'll need some time to process all this and decide how best to proceed. Of course. But David, he said, standing up, your grandmother was right about you. She said you were the only one with enough wisdom to use power correctly. I left the private office with 3 folders hidden inside my coat and a completely new feeling running through my veins. It wasn't just anger or satisfaction. It was the crystal clear understanding that for the first time in my life, I had more power than them. And they had no idea what was about to happen. When I left Dr. Mendez's office and returned to the waiting room, I found a scene that made my stomach churn. Helena and Roberto were hugging, whispering to each other with smiles they couldn't hide. Cousin Fernanda looked at me with a false expression of pity, as if I were a lost dog in the rain. "David dear," Helena approached, placing her hand on my shoulder with theatrical kindness. "I know you must be upset, but you need to understand that Grandma was always very practical. She knew you have your life organized as a teacher." Roberto joined us, jingling his car keys casually. "Exactly, cousin. And look, now you don't have to worry about all the boring bureaucratic issues of running a business. You can focus on what you really love to do." What I really loved to do. As if teaching were a hobby I practiced in my spare time. "You're right," I replied, forcing a weak smile. I guess Grandma knew what she was doing. The satisfaction on their faces was almost palpable. Helena exchanged a quick glance with Roberto, and I saw at that exact moment how relieved they were. They thought I had swallowed the whole story, that I was going home empty-handed and heartbroken. "I'm glad you understand," Helena said, squeezing my shoulder once more. "Now Roberto and I have some administrative matters to discuss with Dr. Mendez. Technical issues regarding the transition of the restaurants, nothing that would interest you." Technical issues. They were probably planning how to divide the spoils. They thought they had one. "Sure," I said. "I'll be going then. I have classes to prepare for tomorrow." I left the building and walked slowly to my car, knowing they were watching me through the window. I kept my shoulders hunched, my head down, perfectly playing the role of the rejected and defeated grandson. But when I got home, the first thing I did was spread all the folders Dr. Mendez had given me on the kitchen table. For the next 3 hours, I read every document, every email, every audit report. The picture that emerged was even worse than I had imagined. Helena hadn't embezzled just 200,000 reis. The detailed report showed a systematic pattern of fraud dating back 5 years. Phantom suppliers, duplicate invoices, ghost employees on the payroll. The total was close to 700,000 reis. Roberto was even more creative. In addition to using the promotional account to pay his gambling debts, he had created a fictitious marketing company that provided services to the family restaurants. A company that existed only on paper, but received substantial monthly payments. But the discovery that shocked me the most was in a separate folder. Correspondence between Helena and an investor from Sao Paulo, discussing the sale of 2 restaurants in the chain without my grandmother's knowledge. They were literally selling her assets while pretending to manage them. I grabbed my phone and called my former coworker Patricia, who now worked as an investigative journalist at Estadeo. We had been friends since college, and I knew I could trust her. "David," she answered on the second ring. "What a surprise. How are you?" "Hi, Pat. I'm fine, but I need a favor. Are you still working on corporate corruption investigations?" There was a pause. "It depends. Why do you want to know?" I took a deep breath. "Because I just uncovered a family fraud scheme that could be a big story. And you might be the right person to help me document everything properly." "I'm intrigued. Can you tell me more?" I quickly explained the situation, without going into too many specific details, but enough to pique her journalistic interest. "David, this is serious. If you have solid evidence of embezzlement and fraud, we're talking about crimes that could result in jail time." "I know. And I have all the evidence. The question is, how do I proceed without them suspecting that I know everything?" Patricia was silent for a few seconds, clearly processing the information. "First thing, you need to make copies of everything and keep them in safe places. Second, don't confront anyone yet. Third, send me everything via encrypted email so I can analyze it from a journalistic point of view." If you're following this story of family betrayal and want to know how a journalistic investigation can completely change the game, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That night, I scanned all the documents and created multiple digital copies, saving them to different cloud services and sending copies to Patricia through an encrypted email system she recommended. But it was while I was organizing the papers that I found something that completely changed my perspective on the whole situation. At the bottom of the correspondence folder was a handwritten letter from my grandmother addressed to me, dated just a week before her death. A letter that Dr. Mendez hadn't mentioned. My dear David, if you are reading this, then my plan has worked and you have discovered the truth about Helena and Roberto. But there is something else you need to know. They did not start stealing out of greed. They started because they are being blackmailed. Roberto owes 400,000 reais to some very dangerous people. Helena is being pressured by her ex-husband, who is threatening to expose a scandal from her past if he doesn't receive regular payments. I'm not justifying what they did, but I want you to understand that sometimes people make desperate choices when they feel cornered. The decision on how to use this information is yours, my grandson. You can destroy them completely, and they would deserve it. Or you can find a way to save our family by punishing the guilty but offering them a chance at redemption. I trust your wisdom to make the right choice. With eternal love, Grandma Marina. I dropped the letter on the table and leaned back in my chair. My grandmother, even after death, continued to surprise me with her ability to see beyond the surface of situations. Suddenly, simple revenge no longer seemed enough. If I just exposed Helena and Roberto, I would be potentially putting their lives in real danger. Roberto owed money to loan sharks, and Helena was being blackmailed. But that didn't mean they would go unpunished. It meant I needed a more sophisticated plan. A plan that would solve the problem at its root, protect our family, but ensure that they paid appropriately for what they had done. I took a new notebook and began to write. On the first page I wrote, Operation Family Cleanup Phase 1, Complete Investigation. Throughout the night, I developed a multi-step plan. First, I would need to confirm the information about the blackmail. Second, identify exactly who was behind the pressure. Third, find a way to neutralize these threats. And fourth, confront Helena and Roberto from a position of absolute strength. By sunrise, I had a complete plan. It wasn't just about recovering the stolen money or punishing the guilty. It was about ridding our family of all toxic influences and ensuring that nothing like this ever happened again. At 7 in the morning, I called Patricia. Change of plans, I said when she answered. I need more than a news story. I need a full investigation, including tracking down blackmailers and loan sharks. David, she said with a hint of concern in her voice, you're getting into deep water. I know. But for the first time in my life, I have enough resources and information to clean up this mess once and for all. And you're sure you want to do this alone? I looked at the files scattered across my desk, at my grandmother's letter, at the plan I had spent the entire night devising. I'm not alone, I replied. I have the truth on my side. And sometimes, the truth is the most powerful weapon there is. Patricia sighed. All right. But we'll do it my way. Professionally, with backup, and without unnecessary risks. Perfect. Because what Helena and Roberto don't know is that they've just awakened a teacher who has spent years studying strategy, planning, and executing complex projects. I hung up the phone and looked out the window. It was a beautiful, sunny day, perfect for starting the most important operation of my life. Helena and Roberto thought they had one. That the professor's grandson had been easily dismissed and that now they could freely manage the business they had stolen. They had no idea that the real war was just beginning. And this time, I had all the advantages. Over the next 10 days, I turned my house into an operations center. Patricia taught me basic investigative journalism techniques, and together we put together a detailed picture of everything that was happening. The first step was to confirm the information about the blackmail. Patricia had contacts in various areas, including a former police officer who now worked as a private investigator. Within 48 hours, we had the names, addresses, and criminal records of the loan sharks who were pressuring Roberto. Helena's ex-husband was even more interesting. Marcos Valila, an accountant who had been arrested for tax evasion 3 years earlier. Apparently, Helena had helped cover up some of his crimes, and now he was using that as leverage to extract money on a regular basis. This changes everything, Patricia said, analyzing the documents scattered across my desk. If we can get direct evidence of the blackmail, Helena and Roberto can be reclassified as victims in some respects. But they're still guilty of embezzlement, I replied. Blackmail explains the motive, it doesn't justify the crime. As we investigated, Helena and Roberto continued to operate as usual. I saw Helena posting photos on social media of management meetings at restaurants, posing as the new head of the family. Roberto published an article on LinkedIn about innovation in family business management. Their arrogance was almost comical. They thought they had eliminated the only obstacle between them and total control of my grandmother's empire. In the second week, I implemented the first phase of my plan. I called the restaurant chain's chief accountant, Mr. Augusto, who had known my family for decades. "David, what a surprise," he said when I identified myself. "I'm so sorry about the loss of your grandmother. Donna Marina was an extraordinary woman." "Thank you, Mr. Augusto. Actually, I'm calling because I'd like to better understand how the restaurant's financial operations work. I know Helena and Roberto are running things now, but as her grandson, I'd like to be more involved." There was a pause. "Of course, David. But you should talk to Helena about that. She's the one who coordinates administrative matters." "I know. But before I talk to her, I wanted to understand the basic numbers. Monthly revenue, main expenses, that kind of thing. Just so I don't seem completely lost in the conversation." Mr. Augusto agreed to send me a summary report. It wasn't confidential information, just general data that any family member would be entitled to know. When I received the report, the discrepancies became even more obvious. The official figures Mr. Augusto sent me didn't match the figures I had seen in my grandmother's forensic audit documents. The difference was almost 200,000 reais in the last quarter alone. If you are following this family corruption investigation and want to see how small details can bring down million-dollar schemes, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Patricia and I spent the weekend connecting all the dots. We had evidence of embezzlement, the identity of the blackmailers, official financial reports showing discrepancies, and now an accountant who could testify about irregularities if questioned properly. "David," Patricia said on Sunday night, "you need to make a decision. Either we do this through official channels, police, courts, formal proceedings, or we do it our way." "What's the difference?" "Official channels are slower but safer. Our way is faster and more effective, but it involves risks." I looked at all the documents, photographs, and evidence scattered across the table. For 2 weeks, I had lived and breathed this investigation. Every discovery fueled my determination. "Our way," I said. "But we do it right. We don't just want to expose Helena and Roberto. We want to solve the whole problem, including the blackmailers." Patricia smiled. "Then we'll need professional help for the next phase." She made a call and scheduled a meeting for the following Tuesday with someone she described only as an expert in resolving complicated situations. That night, before going to bed, I called Dr. Mendez. "David, how are you handling all this?" "Better than I expected. Dr. Mendez, I need you to maintain absolute confidentiality about our conversation and the royal inheritance. For a few more weeks." "Of course. May I ask why?" "Because I'm going to clean house completely before I take official control. And for that, I need Helena and Roberto to continue feeling safe." When I hung up, I looked out the window and saw the city lights. Somewhere out there, Helena was sleeping peacefully, thinking she had gotten everything she wanted. Roberto was probably planning how to spend money he didn't even know he had lost. But on Tuesday, our operation would enter a completely new phase. A phase that would irreversibly change the entire situation. I picked up my grandmother's letter and read the last sentence again. "I trust your wisdom to make the right choice." Finally, I knew exactly what that choice was. The meeting took place in a discreet cafe in the city center. Patricia arrived accompanied by a man in his 50s, with gray hair, a simple suit, and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of the environment before sitting down. "David, this is Miguel Santos. Former federal police officer, now a consultant in corporate investigations." Miguel extended his hand with a firm grip. "Patricia told me about your situation. Interesting how people underestimate teachers." For 2 hours, I laid out the entire case. Miguel asked few questions, but they were all to the point. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Your plan is good, but incomplete. You want to solve the problem, but you're not thinking about the legal consequences for yourselves." He explained that confronting the blackmailers directly could put us at risk. It would be better to create a situation where they expose themselves.
How?
Miguel smiled. Let me take care of that part. But first, we need to force Helena and Roberto into a position where they have no choice but to act desperately. The following Thursday, we implemented the first phase. I called Helena, perfectly playing the role of the confused and discouraged grandson. Aunt Helena, I've been thinking about what you said about getting me more involved in the family business. Maybe I should learn some basics. The satisfaction in her voice was almost audible. Oh, David. That's wonderful. Of course we can talk about it. We set up a meeting for Saturday at the restaurant's administrative office. She didn't know that Patricia would be recording our conversation from a car parked outside, nor that Miguel had discreetly installed microphones in the office the night before. On Saturday, I arrived right on time. Helena was radiant, wearing a new blazer and exuding a confidence I had never seen in her before. David, I'm so happy you finally decided to take an interest in the family business, she said, leading me through the office as if she owned the place. It's just that, after Grandma died, I realized that maybe I should be more responsible. Exactly. Your grandmother always said you had potential, but you needed to mature. For 40 minutes, Helena proudly explained how she was modernizing operations. Unbeknownst to me, she detailed every fraudulent scheme she had implemented, using terms like cost optimization and supplier restructuring. Roberto arrived in the middle of the conversation, equally confident. Cousin. Helena told me you want to learn about the business. Excellent timing. We're expanding into 3 new cities. Expanding? With what money? Roberto and Helena exchanged a quick glance. Well, Roberto said, we have some reserves that Grandma had set aside for emergencies. And some interested investors, Helena quickly added. That's when I decided to push the button. That's great. Actually, I spoke with Mr. Augusto yesterday. He mentioned some discrepancies in the financial reports and asked me to take a look. The room fell silent. Helena stopped smiling. Roberto stood up from his chair. Discrepancies? Helena asked, her voice slightly higher. Nothing major, I replied casually. Just a few numbers that don't add up between his reports and, well, other documents I found. Roberto approached. What other documents? I smiled for the first time in the conversation. The ones Grandma kept in her private safe. Helena's face paled visibly. David, I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't, I said, pulling a folder from my coat. Because you didn't know she hired forensic auditors 6 months ago. I placed the first report on the table. Helena sat down heavily. David, Roberto tried, look, if there's some kind of mix-up, we can explain. Can you explain the ghost suppliers? The duplicate invoices? The marketing company that only exists on paper? Roberto opened and closed his mouth several times, like a fish out of water. Or, I continued, would you prefer me to explain about the loan sharks and the blackmailing ex-husband? It was like throwing a bomb into the room. Helena began to cry. Roberto sat up abruptly, all the air leaving his lungs. How did you? Helena whispered. Find out? Grandma knew everything, Helena. Everything. And she left very specific instructions on how to proceed. Miguel had taught me that the crucial moment would be when they realized there was no escape. That would be when they would show their true colors. David, Roberto said, his voice now desperate, you don't understand. I owed money to some very dangerous people. They threatened my family. And you, I looked at Helena, were being blackmailed by Marcos. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Why didn't you ask for help? Why did you steal from your own grandmother? Because, Helena said between sobs, she never took us seriously. She always thought we were incompetent, irresponsible. And you were. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of my phone ringing. Excuse me, I said, answering. Hello. David, it was Miguel's voice. We just arrested Marcos Valila and 3 loan sharks. They're confessing everything in exchange for plea bargains. You can proceed to the final phase. I hung up the phone and looked at Helena and Roberto, who were staring at me with expressions of absolute terror. That was my lawyer, I lied. Looks like you have visitors coming. As if following a script, we heard sirens approaching the building. Roberto stood up and ran to the window. David, what have you done? What Grandma asked me to do. I cleaned house. Helena was in a state of total shock. But you're just a teacher. I'm just a teacher, I agreed, who inherited $30 million and complete control of the company you thought you had stolen. The look on their faces when the truth finally dawned on them was exactly as my grandmother had predicted. It wasn't just shock. It was the complete realization that they had seriously underestimated the wrong person. And that was just the beginning of what they would discover about the consequences of messing with the wrong family. The sirens we heard weren't from the criminal police, as Helena and Roberto thought in their desperation. They were from the Internal Revenue Service and the civil police, arriving with search and seizure warrants based on the evidence Patricia and Miguel had compiled. David, Helena whispered, still in shock, please you can't. I can and I will, I replied, putting the folders back in my coat. But not in the way you think. In the days that followed, the whole truth came to light. Helena and Roberto were formally charged with embezzlement, fraud, and tax evasion. The total amount embezzled came to 1,200,000 reis over 5 years. But as my grandmother had predicted, I did not seek total destruction. I sought restorative justice. With the evidence of blackmail, we reached agreements that allowed Helena and Roberto to cooperate with the authorities to capture the real criminals behind the pressure. Miguel coordinated the operation that resulted in the arrest of Marcos Valila and the network of loan sharks that terrorized Roberto. Helena served 2 years of house arrest and community service, in addition to returning all the embezzled money. Roberto received a similar sentence, but with psychological counseling for gambling addiction. Most importantly, both lost all rights to the family business. I officially took control of Marina Santos restaurants 3 weeks after that meeting in the office. The first thing I did was call all the employees to a general meeting. My name is David, I said to the 230 employees gathered in the main hall of the flagship restaurant. I am Dona Marina's grandson and your new owner. I know you don't know me, but you know my work. I explained that for years I had visited the restaurants as Roberto's cousin, discreetly helping with administrative issues, suggesting improvements, and talking to employees about their needs. Many remembered me, but no one knew who I really was. Over the next few months, we will implement changes that my grandmother had been planning for a long time, but which were sabotaged by mismanagement, I continued. First, a 20% raise for everyone. Second, quarterly profit sharing. Third, comprehensive health insurance for employees and their families. The applause was deafening. Some of the older employees cried openly, remembering when Dona Marina made similar promises that never materialized because of the financial problems Helena always cited. Patricia documented the entire transformation of the company in a series of reports that eventually became a book. The professor who inherited an empire became a case study in business schools on ethical leadership and family management. But the real change happened in the company's culture. In 6 months, we opened 2 new locations with a concept my grandmother had always dreamed of, restaurants that combined quality cuisine with social responsibility. Each new location gave preference to hiring people in social reintegration programs, offered free meals to vulnerable children, and allocated 10% of profits to scholarships for technical culinary schools. Professor David, one of the senior chefs, told me one afternoon, Dona Marina would be proud. The company has never run as smoothly as it does now. Dr. Mendez visited me a year later to discuss minor legal issues. During our conversation, he mentioned something that struck me deeply. Your grandmother left an additional letter to be delivered only after your first year in charge, he said, pulling a sealed envelope from his inside jacket pocket. She said you would know when the time was right to read it. The letter was short but direct. David, if you are reading this, then you have done more than just beat Helena and Roberto. You have turned the company into something that honors our family. I always knew you would understand the difference between power and responsibility. A teacher by vocation, a leader by nature. Now you know that it wasn't just the inheritance I left you. It was the opportunity to prove that character is worth more than money, that education is worth more than greed, and that true family is not defined by blood, but by integrity. Use what we built together wisely. With eternal love and infinite pride, Grandma Marina. I cried for the first time since her death. Not out of sadness, but out of deep gratification for having honored her trust. Today, 5 years later, Marina Santos Restaurants operates 15 locations in 6 states. We have over 800 direct employees and contribute over 2 million reais annually to social projects. Helena works as a consultant for a small event company in Goiânia. She calls me every Christmas to thank me for not destroying her life completely. Our relationship has never gone back to what it was, but there is a mutual respect based on truth. Roberto managed to control his gambling addiction and now runs a small digital marketing agency. Ironically, one of the strategies he uses with clients was inspired by campaigns he had developed for our restaurants before he started embezzling money. Sometimes we run into each other at family events. We talk politely, but there's always an underlying tension. They know I could have destroyed their lives, and I know they betrayed the woman they loved most. The most important lesson I learned wasn't about revenge or justice. It was about the power of patience and proper preparation. When you are underestimated, you have two choices. You can react impulsively to prove your worth, or you can use that underestimation as a strategic advantage. I chose the second option. My grandmother didn't just leave me money. She left me a masterclass on how to identify people's character, how to plan for the long term, and how to turn adverse situations into opportunities for growth. Helena and Roberto saw me as just a teacher. For them, teacher was synonymous with failure, someone who couldn't succeed in the real world of business. But teachers know something that many entrepreneurs don't: how to observe, how to learn, how to plan methodically, and how to execute complex projects with limited resources. A teacher is someone who works every day to turn potential into reality. And that's exactly what I did with my grandmother's inheritance. If you've made it this far in this story of family, betrayal, and justice, subscribe to the channel because we have many other stories of people who were underestimated and showed what they are capable of when their backs are against the wall. Yesterday, walking through the city center, I passed in front of Dr. Mendez's office. Through the window, I saw Helena leaving a meeting, probably sorting out bureaucratic issues related to her events company. She saw me through the glass and waved shyly. I waved back. I felt no anger, no satisfaction, no pity. I just felt a quiet understanding that each of us was exactly where we needed to be. She was learning to build something of her own with honesty. I was honoring the legacy of a woman who believed in me when no one else did. And my grandmother? Well, I'm sure she's smiling, knowing that the troublesome grandson who chose to be a teacher became the businessman she always knew he could be. The last time Helena asked me about the business, I was signing contracts for our 15th location. She asked how I had managed to expand so quickly. Simple, I replied. I learned from the best teacher I ever had. And teachers know that true success is measured not by what you accumulate, but by what you build for others.